Good afternoon. Hello, backfighters. We are excited to bring you this topic of holiday baking for backfighters and promoting home safe handling of ingredients. I would have liked to bring you the scents of the season and the baking smells, but hopefully you'll see enough pretty pictures that you begin to get that idea. So welcome and let's get started. Today's lineup includes Don Kautter. He is a senior advisor in the Office of Food Safety at the FDA, CFSAN, and Sharon Davis, a family and consumer sciences educator with the Home Baking Association. We also are starring the hot chocolate cookies, which are part of the Story of Your Dinner campaign this year and are based on the Safe Recipe Style Guide produced by the Partnership for Food Safety Education. I'm Shelley Feist. I'm Executive Director of the Partnership. It's my great pleasure to bring you this webinar, and I want to start out by telling you, if you have questions, please to post them in the questions function. I'll mention this again, but at any time throughout the webinar, post your questions and we're going to get to them at the end. Next, please. So, the other issue I wanted to talk about in the housekeeping is there will be a survey too. When the webinar is over, you'll get a survey. Those are enormously helpful to us, so please respond to the survey. Many of you are here today because you are earning continuing education units, and we're very happy to offer CEUs from ANFP, CDR, and NEHA. You can download those certificates here from the sidebar. You'll see a section called Handouts. It'll be in the follow-up email, or when this gets put up on our events tab under recorded webinars or webinar recordings, you'll be able to find the CEU certificates and download them there also. We are super happy to have the support of the Home Baking Association today, and they have posted a door prize. So we're going to have one lucky winner. You have to be on the webinar live, and we know who you are because GoToWebinar will tell us. You have to be on the webinar live, and we'll have a drawing. You'll be contacted by our new community engagement manager, Katie Weston. And here are the prizes you get: Baking with Friends book and CD, and the Baking Food Safety Guide, plus a baker's tool. So that's coming after the webinar. Next, please. All right, I want to introduce Don Kautter. He's Senior Advisor in the Office of Food Safety at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. He's a subject matter expert on, there are many of these things: food safety, juice HACCP, food defense, foodborne outbreaks, the human food FSMA regulations, and FDA compliance and enforcement activities, as well as one of the primary certified trainers for teaching regulators how to inspect against the FSMA preventive controls for human foods regulation. Don has held numerous positions within the FDA, both at CFSAN and the Office of Regulatory Affairs, dealing with food safety, policy, compliance, and enforcement. Don, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and an early happy holidays to everybody as we kick off this holiday baking conversation today. So I have 5 main items for discussion with you today. Wanted to give you some background on flour issues and agency concerns associated with flour. Also wanted to give you a reminder about the safety of shell eggs as we go into this baking season. I wanted to cover with you our Food Safety Modernization Act definition of ready-to-eat food, because that conversation tends to come up an awful lot when we're talking about flour and associated flour products. And then I wanted to briefly go through with you our current restaurant, retail, and consumer messages associated with flour in regards to food safety. Next. Let me start by giving you some background on some selected recent recalls and outbreaks associated with flour and flour products. Really, just to make sure that we're all on the same page related to the concerns that the agency has with flour and flour-containing products. Back in 2009, there was a pathogenic E. coli outbreak. So these are the E. coli that cause illness and cause disease. There was a pathogenic E. coli outbreak that was linked to the consumption of raw, prepackaged cookie dough. This is the first, as far as we know, pathogenic E. coli outbreak associated with raw cookie dough. The leading theory at the time was that E. coli was introduced into the cookie dough via the flour ingredient. 77 people were sick from this outbreak. In late 2015 and during 2016, the FDA, the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, and state and local officials investigated a multi-state outbreak of, again, pathogenic E. coli infections. As a result of this investigation, the epidemiologic, traceback, and laboratory information indicated that flour produced at a Kansas City, Missouri facility was the likely source of this outbreak. At the end of September 2016, CDC reported that 63 individuals were infected with this outbreak strain, reported from 24 different states. Illnesses started right around December 21st, 2015, and went through September 5th, 2016. Unfortunately, 17 people were hospitalized, and one person developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is a severe kidney disease. In addition, approximately 45 million tons of flour and associated flour products were recalled. More information on this recall and this outbreak can be found on the web link listed on the slide. Next. In late 2018 and early 2019, officials in Oregon identified salmonella in a box of classic white cake mix. CDC reviewed the PulseNet database and identified 7 recent infections from 5 different states with the same strain of salmonella as the salmonella identified in the cake mix. Unfortunately, there was not enough epidemiologic and traceback information available to definitively determine if ill people in this outbreak were linked to the contaminated cake mix, but it was a link via the PulseNet database. In late 2018 to mid-2019, a total of 21 people were infected with an outbreak strain of, again, pathogenic E. coli. These were reported from 9 states, with illnesses starting on approximately December 11th, 2018, and going through May 21st, 2019. There were 3 hospitalizations and no deaths were reported in this outbreak. Epidemiologic and laboratory evidence, supported by product distribution records, indicated flour was the likely source of this outbreak. Several flour and flour-containing products were recalled because of this, and because they may have been contaminated with the pathogenic E. coli. Again, for those of you that want some additional information, we have postings regarding these 2 different outbreaks on our website. Next. Let me switch gears a bit and talk a little bit about the science background, some recent information regarding the occurrence and levels of pathogens in raw wheat. Earlier this year, a Journal of Food Protection article came out entitled Occurrence and Levels of Salmonella, Enterohemogenic E. coli, or EHEC, and Listeria in raw wheat. For those of you that may not know, so the EHEC, or the enterohemorrhagic E. coli, so that's a strain of E. coli that produces a toxin called Shiga toxin. This toxin can cause extreme damage to the lining of the GI tract and other health issues. So these are the pathogenic E. coli. This article noted that wheat flour had been implicated in several outbreaks of foodborne illness in recent years, yet there was little information available regarding microbial pathogens in wheat and wheat flour. This article and the research associated with it was a baseline study to determine the prevalence and levels of pathogens in wheat samples taken before milling. Of note, the study found that the prevalence of Salmonella and E. coli in raw wheat emphasizes the need to cook wheat products. 3,891 grain samples were tested for E. coli and Salmonella, and 1,285 samples were tested for Listeria. Of the wheat berries sampled, 0.44% were positive for E. coli. So that's 17 samples out of those 3,891. And 1.23% were positive for Salmonella. So that's 48 out of those 3,891 samples. The article also noted that cooking wheat products is the best preventative measure against foodborne illness from wheat and wheat products. Next. As we go into the baking season, a reminder about shell eggs and egg safety. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration estimates that there are approximately 79,000 cases of foodborne illness and 30 deaths each year caused by eating eggs contaminated with Salmonella. Our basic messages are the same ones that you have heard before. Cook eggs until both the yolk and the white are firm. Scrambled eggs should not be runny. Casseroles and other dishes containing eggs should be cooked to a minimum of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. For recipes that call for eggs that are raw or uncooked when the dish is served, for instance, Caesar salad dressing, some homemade ice cream, use either shell eggs that have been treated to destroy Salmonella by pasteurization or some other approved method, or use pasteurized egg products. There is a lot more information regarding the safety of shell eggs on the website linked on this slide. Next. Let me switch gears a bit and talk about a definition that continues to come up in this conversation. One of the items related to our discussion today continues to be around the terms associated with ready to eat and not ready to eat, and what that means from our regulatory standpoint. I wanted to note to all of you today that in our final rule, entitled Current Good Manufacturing Practice, Hazard Analysis, and Risk-Based Preventive Controls for Human Food, we have defined what a ready-to-eat food is. The regulation defines ready-to-eat as any food that is normally eaten in its raw state or any other food, including a processed food, for which it is reasonably foreseeable that the food will be eaten without further processing that would significantly minimize biological hazards. Now, you can probably guess that while this definition may appear on its surface to be relatively cut and dry, it is not as simple as that. We are working on additional guidance related to ready to eat and not ready to eat. We are hopeful that this guidance, once issued, will assist the industry and consumers in defining what foods may be considered ready to eat and what foods may fall outside that definition. Next. Shelley.
Don, you might be asking, what is this in the middle of my slides? Well, we thought it was very important to ask people today if they are cookie dough defiant. So this is a poll we would love all participants to take. Are you cookie dough defiant? Yes, I defend eating my cookie dough. No, of course not. Sometimes I admit. And what do you mean by cookie dough defiant? So we'll keep the poll open for 30 seconds. So please vote. We're going to show you the results, so that's going to be the fun part. So I know we have a lot of people on this webinar, so please take the poll. So much more fun when you get to see what everybody has to say. So are you cookie dough defiant? All right, let's look at the results. Oh, excellent. This is an informed audience. Don, only 51% say, of course not. They would not fight to the death to eat their raw cookie dough. But 32% admit they might. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to give kudos to those that were honest and says sometimes I admit.
Yes, good. Honesty is good too. Okay. Thanks, Don.
There's a lot on this slide, but let me continue my presentation with what some of our restaurant and retail, as well as what some of our consumer messages are in regards to flour and flour-containing products, and where you can find some additional information. Our current message for the restaurant and retail market is that restaurants and retailers should be aware that flour may be a source of pathogens. Flour could make people sick, and there should be controls in place to control the potential for cross-contamination of food processing equipment and for the food processing environment. Regular, frequent cleaning and sanitizing of food contact surfaces and utensils used in food preparation may help to minimize that likelihood of cross-contamination. And obviously, to cook flour-containing products as appropriate to kill pathogens of concern. Additional information, again, is listed on the website for those of you that want some additional information or retail and restaurant messages. Next. We currently also have specific consumer messages and information relative to raw dough and flour-containing products. FDA continues to warn against eating raw dough made from any brand of flour or baking mix before cooking. Consumers should always practice safe food handling and preparation measures when handling flour. The FDA specifically recommends the following when it comes to safe food handling practices to stay healthy. Do not eat or play with any raw cookie dough or any other raw dough or batter product made with flour that is intended to be cooked or baked. Follow package instructions on baking mixes and other flour-containing products for proper temperature cooking and times. Wash hands, work surfaces, and utensils thoroughly after contact with raw dough products containing flour. And as we always say, keep raw food separate from other foods while preparing them to prevent any contamination that may be present from spreading. Next. We have posted some helpful educational web links around these issues that we've discussed today. Here are just a couple of them. I will also tell you that we have more coming, especially for this holiday baking season. And these are relative to flour and flour-containing products and shell eggs again. These items should be out very soon. We actually just this morning, I think, cleared the final copy, so I am hopeful that they will be out this week, and if not this week, very early next week. And as with all of our information, they can be found on the FDA website at www.fda.gov. Next. I want to finish my conversation with you from the slide presentation by just noting that I think we all can acknowledge that there is some confusion in the marketplace. I think we have all seen, for instance, raw cookie dough, quote unquote raw cookie dough, that is available in some stores. And in fact, we are aware of specific stores where their specialty is selling raw cookie dough for consumption. What may be lost in that conversation and marketing is that, in fact, the eggs and the flour were most likely treated to reduce pathogens in the final product. I think the confusion for consumers may be that they see these items and do not understand what safety attributes goes into making them. And they may feel that they can simply replicate these products at home without fully understanding the safety considerations. As another example, I know that many of you have probably seen that there was a fast food restaurant that started selling birthday cake flavored milkshakes over the summer. Again, the concern that consumers may get the wrong message with these products and that they can replicate these items at home is a concern. Finally, all of you can easily find online recipes and cooking shows that frankly may not properly use flour without considering the food safety aspects of the flour. For instance, flour-based Play-Doh comes up more than once. I know that there are still some restaurants that may provide raw dough for kids to play with while their food is being prepared. Again, these are the kinds of food safety considerations and conversations that we all need to work together on to educate the consumers, and it's one of the reasons I've been very happy to join you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thanks so much. A lot to think about there, and here comes even more because we have with us Sharon Davis. If you're familiar with home baking, you probably know about Sharon. She is currently the Director of Program and Membership Development for the Home Baking Association. She is a Family and Consumer Sciences education consultant. She's a graduate of Iowa State University. And in her prior positions, she's been a family and consumer sciences teacher, as well as consultant and director and nutritionist at a test kitchen. She's a spokesperson, and she's author of a number of educational resources, some of which she'll probably preview today. She's active in various professional associations, including the American Association of Family and Consumer Sciences, shout out to AAFCS, the Society for Nutrition Education, and the National Association of Educators of Young Children. So Sharon, thank you so much for being here and talking about baking with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join you. So can you hear me okay? Am I coming through?
Sound good to me.
Good. Okay, we'll go ahead. Let's go. This is just an example of where baking might occur. It can be in an after-school program like Boys and Girls Clubs, or of course it can be in a standard classroom. But I'd like to go on to the next slide, please, Michelle, and we'll just talk about where people are learning to bake and how many are doing so, what challenges might be in terms of what Dawn has brought to us today. So we do regular surveys with Mintel Research, and one of those surveys we conducted in 2011 and another in 2019 to comparatively see, do we have more bakers or fewer bakers in the U.S.? We used a sample size of 2,000 adults. What we really found out was that it remains about the same. About 45% of adults will bake, and that will be at least a couple times a year. But what has grown is that everyday bakers and bakers who will bake more actively has grown over the last 8 years. So we realize it's holding steady for a number of bakers, but that actually there's a growing passion among enthusiasts who like to cook. So let's go to the next slide, please. What we wanted to know in terms of that is that if they bake, are they actually going to follow food safe recommendations? So we know that extension and family consumer sciences programs in schools, 4-H, all of these will do their best to follow FDA and serve safe regulations. In fact, most of those family consumer sciences professionals will actually teach serve safe. So we wanted to see how this was flowing over into home baking in general. So our first question was, how often do you actually follow safe food practices when handling uncooked or unbaked flour? And what we found is that everybody thought pretty much that they were. 93% say they follow safe raw food practices. And let's just emphasize that safe, raw food practices, because I think that tells a little bit in this story, and I'll get to that in a minute. The second slide, or the second, not next slide, but second pie chart indicates to us what really maybe is happening when it comes to tasting raw dough. And there we see that actually 60% say that they will always or frequently will taste the batter or dough and give it to others to taste. So that becomes troublesome, and we say to ourselves, why? Why would that be? That, we think we're practicing safe food practices, but not where raw dough is concerned. And in my teaching, Train the Trainers across the U.S., when I do these trainings, what I will just indicate to you is that part of that is because people did not view flour as a raw ingredient. That came out over and over and over again in our workshops and training sessions with teachers. There was literally a surprise that flour is a raw ingredient. Yes, eggs, absolutely. They were all over that. Partnership, Fight Back, you guys are doing great with that. but they were a little stunned at the idea of flour being raw. Next slide, please. So we would ask ourselves, where is the biggest influence in terms of how we learn to bake? And we were very intrigued by this because, again, we spend a great deal of faith and practice with the educator. And the educator, in this case, begins at home. 92% of those polled would say, Mom, Grandma, Aunt, Uncle, that's how I learned to bake. And then amongst the millennials and those young bakers, absolutely most of their education confidence is coming from social media, cooking shows, and videos online. And all four of these top four will tell you, in a sense, where that education process is happening then and how much food safety will actually be emphasized in this case, because we know they typically are not emphasized necessarily in all of those four categories at a level that we as professional educators would like it to be. So coming in fifth is home ec or family and consumer sciences. And then all of these other programs where we might see some of that food safety being taught continually fall through as being ranked. Next slide. So with that, I just offer to our group that's listening today the challenge that we have with finding adequate education opportunities. If social media is where people will learn their confidence in home baking, then social media has to be part of what we do. But we also have all of that opportunity, pre-K through 12, which Home Baking Association values highly, in which we might be teaching baking food safety as part of the science or STEAM. We call it STEAM because it's a culinary art. Or we might be teaching it in after-school programming where STEM or STEAM could be taught. And in our case, what we've run into is increasingly we have fewer and fewer educators in those programs. And when we switched from home economics to family and consumer sciences, we have slowly lost ground in terms of opportunity in the classrooms in secondary and elementary classrooms. So we've lost 38% of our student population since 2012. And our professional ability to teach the subject matter is in danger. So we truly need those on this call today to take a minute and think about how could we advocate for moving from food education, food handling education, to not an elective, but something that every child should know and not be dependent on their home for the education. So adulting, interestingly enough, if you look up this article that we reference here, just came out, I just find it fascinating that at a collegiate level, the sense of food insecurity and the actual mental strain that students are undergoing in the collegiate world or secondary education world is increasing. And it's because of that lack of education, in part to do with food skills, food preparation, food safety. Next slide, please. So we get to where we started with the cookie dough defiance. If we don't know how to handle and don't view cookie dough or flour as a raw ingredient, which is needed for us to respect the fact that it can be have microbial issues. What about the consumer? Don't they just immediately say, oh, let me learn? And the truth is they don't. So we have an overriding defiance that goes on, and we see it heavily in the social media posts that we read. So, we have this posted in 2018. It hasn't diminished. The numbers of posts for mug muffins, so we can eat them raw or gooey, or opportunity to do your own food safety exercise on flour is all out there. Next slide. To go where Don introduced us, we have all kinds of media experts, and I could be filling Shelley and the partnerships webinar today with examples, but I'm going to take the latest one that came across my desk that we are working with, and that is this was on one of our popular national networks, and then it's all over the internet right now about Hello Cookie Dough. And all due respect, Kristen Tomlin has created quite an incredible commercial operation. She serves up about 2,000 pounds of raw cookie dough every day through her restaurants in New York City. Her book is an immediate success because of that. She's on tour, and she gives how to make your own cookie dough classes every day that she does a tour, or every time she does this tour. In reviewing her book, she gets high points for including food safety. She did tell why flour is not ready to eat, why it is a raw ingredient, but there's no references as to how she bases her own experience and claims on how it is that we can make our own cookie dough. And this is troublesome to us. She most definitely must sell cookie dough from her restaurant or her operation that has a safeguard or a heat treatment that's been applied to it so that she can sell raw dough products. However, the home baker cannot obtain that product. So they don't all know that. But if they do, they would say, okay, how can I do it for myself? And here's where she was obliged to offer her suggestion. One would be to buy her premix, which probably does contain heat-treated flour, I hope. 2, or you can go home and you can heat the flour in a microwave as long as you heat it to 165 degrees. Her third point was to bake flour in a 300-degree oven, check every 2 minutes and stir. And as a family consumer sciences educator, I just have to say this doesn't work. And there's no opportunity to be online to talk with her about this. We haven't had that opportunity. But in cross-checking this, the 165 degrees will not cut it with a very dry flour, as flour is. Flour is a dry ingredient. It's very unlike a ground beef. So you cannot heat it to 165 and assume that it will kill any bacterial component in it. Next slide, please. Shelley?
Hello. Okay, we're going to ask you another poll question. This one you got to put on your food safety hats, which you all have on. Which of these delicious desserts is safe for you to make and enjoy at home? Which one of these could be made safely at home? Cookie dough ice cream, cake batter milkshake, skillet brownie cookie, chocolate chip cookie dough truffles. What do you think? I told you we're going to make you feel hungry and wanting something delicious here. All right, we'll leave this open for about 15 seconds. So please take the poll. We'd love you all to take it because it's a lot of fun to see what people say. Oh, and I better know I better focus here on the correct answer. Okay. Okay. All right. Oh, good. So we have all of you are very food safety conscious. 94%. The skillet brownie cookie is baked in a skillet, cooked in a skillet.
Yep.
All right. So that was fun, and it does give you some sense back to what Sharon was talking about. Just a lot of these things may not be safe, and there are recipes all over the internet not safe. Okay, Sharon, back to you.
Thank you, Shelley. Well, I want that skillet brownie cookie recipe. I think it sounds super, and I don't think I actually, after all these years, have that in my recipe deck. So send it on over, okay? I would love to see it. So it'd be great for portable kitchens, which we do in after-school programming. The DIY flour treatment is not a new thing, and so the cookie dough book is new, but the treatment is not. And I would like our audience to kind of take a look at this from a critical thinking concept, because in the end, when we're in a classroom scenario, or whether it be an informal like 4-H is, or we are formally in a setting like a classroom lab, we can create a lab and we can critically think about it, and that's what we should do with this treatment. And I do it with my students or my teachers all the time. The quote says what Sarah Tain said in 2016: "How could I safely eat raw cookie dough, despite all these bothersome, sorry, Dawn, all these bothersome recalls. How could I do it myself? So the point would be, she said, take 2 cups of flour, spread it on a cookie sheet, and I see she has a silicone mat under it. Bake it at 350 degrees for 5 minutes. So what is the troublesome part? I wish I could get feedback. Shelley, can I actually on this question, or do I just go ahead and work my way through it?
Yes, we can ask people to either put that in chat and indicate that you're chatting to everyone. Do you see the chat? Or put it in the questions, and we'll talk through some of those when we get to Q&A. So yes, what is flawed in this process? If you want to submit that to questions or to chat, that'd be fun. Thank you.
And of course, from us, from the Home Baking Association's perspective, I can give some tips in that I rarely see the same 2 ovens twice in a classroom lab setting. In a lab setting like Manhattan High School, for example, you may have 5 different oven types. You may not have thermometers, and if you do have thermometers, some may be digital, some may be not. You may or may not have actual opportunity to know if the ovens are the same temperature. So these are just some of the points I'd like to raise in terms of controls. But I do want to revisit definitely that 165 degrees kill step. So no matter what Cooking Light says, or no matter what the cookie dough book says, a home treatment that reaches 165 degrees is not going to guarantee that you have killed. You have a kill step happening there. It isn't because of the low moisture content of the flour. Let's move on. I'd love to see some chats coming through on what else is flawed in this process, because it's definite. And let's revisit it towards the end. Okay, Shelley? Next slide, please. So when you're teaching it, that becomes our opportunity to try to overcome the defiance. The cookie dough defiance piece of the puzzle is important to overcome in a teaching situation. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you teach farm to kitchen. This slide would be available to anyone who would want it. You let me know. I'll do my best to provide it to you. But I put it together to emphasize the fact that that grain comes from an outdoor environment, whether it's stored in a bin or on the ground, or it all comes off the ground, in which case we have animals like elk, deer, birds flying over. There's all opportunity for that grain to be somewhat dirty with the ground around it. So the bottom line is, though, it's cleaned. It's cleaned. We want to do that because we don't want to store it with a lot of foreign material in it. It goes to the flour mill there, where it is kept clean and kept moved. And with the new FDA Food Safety Modernization Act, we have all kinds of checks and balances that are put in place at the flour mill. Again, it's clean because no flour mill can store a grain that is not as clean as possible. It creates all kinds of hazards. So the flour mill does its due diligence. The farmer does their due diligence, but nothing about any of those processes cooks the grain itself. And this doesn't have to just be wheat. It can be any non-gluten grain or any other grain in the system. It is not cooked or heated in any way during the process of storage and milling. Next slide, please. So here's a great resource that NAMA and the North American millers in the U.S. and the Canadian millers have prepared for you. And I think, will Michelle get that playing for us? This is there. Good. So a special thanks to the North American millers and Canadian millers. And when we get to the end, we'll cover some of where you can access these, but that particular video is available on their websites as well as on homebaking.org. So you can access it to show it and share it. So I guess where I go with it as an educator, and you will find your ground as well, is that if the teacher or the student can understand how raw flour is from the field to the kitchen, and they can begin to view it as they do a raw egg or raw hamburger, then maybe they can begin to get the concept of why they shouldn't eat raw cookie dough. This if-then relationship is really, as I mentioned earlier, not something that most people think about. It's the egg they think of. Or when they think about hamburger, there are always those risk takers, and we've talked about how do you move them. They will say to themselves, I don't care what you tell me, I am going to eat my scrambled eggs moist, and I am definitely going to eat my burger pink in the middle. And they don't do the temping process. But what we as HBA would like to see is the if-then setup where they see that flour is a raw ingredient, and that B, they can do certain steps that will, just like they do with eggs and ground beef, that will reduce their risk. So next slide, please. Engaging those baking food safety steps is similar to how you engage the fight back steps of Core 4. You temp, you don't cross-contaminate. But one of the new tools that you're going to have introduced to you today is the recipe style guide that Partnership for Food Safety Education has researched with the Food Marketing Institute. And we are delighted by that because what it does is it gives the student or the teacher an opportunity to do the critical thinking in the recipes. So if students will do some self-assessment, as they can with the guide that you see, the smaller inset there is a baking food safety guide with steps lined out. And in the middle is actually the temp chart for internal temps for when you are done baking all types of baked goods. And then it contains also the label piece that the millers have and FDA have approved for all flour labels. We want those teachers and those students and those home bakers to learn to take temps. And if they could confirm that their digital thermometer is accurate, they can confirm they have an oven that's up to temp, and they're not used to seeing half-done products coming out of their oven and eating them, those would all be helpful steps for them to apply. This also other piece that I think even I had to bump this up in my practice was that idea of washing hands between the handling of mixing and shaping dough and then going to the next step where you might be taking cookies or bread out of the oven and then you're putting on a cooling rack, and maybe that cooling rack is setting right near the flour where you did the mixing. All those washing steps that are part of the Core 4 and how you handle raw vegetable or raw fruits and vegetables, all of that is important. Next step. Next slide. We have a mug muffin lab that we are offering to you today. That is free for a download off of our website. It's also on the back of our poster. But just again, that is because mug muffins are so popular. Let's go ahead and use the North American Millers video. Let's use their poster. Let's go ahead and talk about, is GUI safe? Could it be safe? And begin to do some temping on things like mug muffins. And this can be done portably in a classroom, after-school program, community program, anywhere. And again, that minimum 165 degrees is what you start there when it comes out of the microwave, and you see if you're even at that minimum. But you still need to rise to the doneness temperature of quick breads. Next slide. Finally, what we want to avoid is that extreme fear of just saying, oh, well, if all flour has contamination, or we've had all these recalls, we don't want flour in our home. Or in the case of the King Arthur flour recall, they just simply decided we just can't have a baking competition this year hosted by them at the North Carolina State Fair. These type of fears should be eliminated by how we handle the education process and the understanding that when it's baked, you have achieved the goal. If you've handled the steps of food safety just like you do with beef or poultry or eggs, then you can go ahead and do these type of competitions as well as bake at home safely. Next slide. Our goal is to identify those attitudes and practices, to be informed by them and by the research that's being done, to bring focus on baking food safety education, because it has been something that really isn't focused on heavily in culinary classrooms or at home, and to advocate for improved and expanded training, whether it's through extension or through FCS or other community programs. We want to teach and encourage those safe food baking practices so that people feel confident baking at home and in community settings, and we want to collaborate. We want to set up a place for you to get what you need. So let's go to the next slide. With that said, HBA offers you a one-stop shop where we hope to always link you to Partnership for Food Safety, the Miller's materials, our own home baking education materials, and many of those materials are in English, Spanish, and the poster and the video are even in French, thanks to the Canadian Millers. Next slide. Up. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Sharon. In part, to introduce you to our new community engagement manager, I'd like to introduce a video with Baking with Katie, Will, and Sam, and then we'll have a second video of the hot chocolate cookies, and we'll be ready for questions. Remember to submit your questions.
Hey, Will, Sam, do you want to bake some cookies today?
Yeah!
Will you read the recipe?
Wash hands with soap and water. Why does the recipe say to wash your hands with soap and water?
Oh, this is a special recipe, Will. It has steps to help us cook our food safely so we don't get bacteria on the food.
Let's wash our hands.
Do you remember what we do first?
What?
Get our hands wet.
And sing the alphabet.
Yeah, while we scrub. Okay, get your hands a little wet. And then we're going to scrub and sing.
Now I know my ABCs.
You're scrubbing, Sam. Will, you're supposed to be scrubbing. Do you know why we do the alphabet?
Why?
Because it's about 20 seconds. That's how long we need to scrub. Okay, get a paper towel and dry your hands. Let's start finding the ingredients, Sam. Okay, Will, we need chocolate chips and butter. Can you find those? Hey, Will and Sam, do you want to help me stir the flour in? Okay, Will, you stir first.
This is gonna be so hard.
I'll help you.
That's better. I can take it on from here.
All right, let's let Sam try. Sam, you want to stir?
Yeah.
Okay, come on up.
Here it goes.
See what you can do. Oh, do you need a little help?
Yeah.
This looks yummy. What do you guys think?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so yummy. Can I eat it?
Oh, Sam, we can't eat it right now. It has raw eggs and flour in it. And that could have bacteria like salmonella or E. coli that could make us sick. We're going to have to cook it first. Is that okay? Yeah, we'll bake it in the oven.
Can I put it in?
All right, let's get that stuff ready.
I'll put it on.
Hey, Will, Sam, the cookies are ready.
Yay!
for you. Okay, try a bite. Tell me how they taste. Are they good?
Yeah.
Oh, they look so yummy. Good work baking them.
We want to show you the hot chocolate cookies that Katie was baking with Will and Sam. This is a video and printable recipe available at storyofyourdinner.org. It's based on the Safe Recipe Guide. So I do want to let you know that those cookies are as delicious as they look. They are really good. The Safe Recipe Style Guide is a resource for you. And before we go to questions, I just briefly want to talk about it. You'll find it at saferecipeguide.org. This is based on observational research that showed that if a recipe includes safe handling prompts, people preparing food are much more likely, of course, to practice food safety. So please check out the guide and please check out all the recipes we have that you could turn around and use or point people to on your website or in social media that already contain these prompts. So I want to move into our questions. I think that's next. We are coming up against our hour here. First, I want to thank many of you sent some comments about the idea of home treatment of flour. Number one, these are comments from you, the people on the webinar. Heating flour in a home kitchen is an explosion waiting to happen. Thank you for that. I think as we see people in cottage industries who might be making really a pretty considerable amount of baked goods at home, that's something to be wary of. Thank you. Explosion waiting to happen. A couple of you said in commenting on this idea of a heat treatment at home, what would the temperature for the flour be? How thick would you spread it? The heat transfer with different cookie sheets and silicone mats is different. How would you measure the temp of this flour, even if you knew what it should be? And one comment was that flour will not absorb moisture at the same level, and the gluten will be denatured. Both of these affect texture. So I'm going to move into some questions, and I'll assign them to our panelists here. Don, are you with us?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you for hanging in there and watching all these cookies.
I'm hungry now.
Should I give you I don't know if this is a stumper question, probably not for you. And it's not per se baking, but it's somewhat related because it's about consumption of raw grain. Will the trend in eating raw oats, in overnight oats, etc., which you may be familiar with some of those processes, does that concern FDA?
Well, that's a good question. So yes, I'm aware of the trends of some of these, soak overnight and eat oats. The honest answer is I'm not aware of the process that those oats go through before they're put in the container prior to the actual moistening of those for overnight stay. Clearly, from the standpoint of, is it a grain that comes directly from the field, and is it typically heated or treated or not treated to kill bacteria? I mean, that would be the question that I would have to sort of dig more into about those soak overnight oats. I just do not know.
Okay. See, honest answer. I think we could like stump people with all these different trends and uses of grains. Someone asked about the baking temperature and time for bread, but I did see it was on the chart. So check out that bake it, test it, eat it chart that Sharon talked about, and that listed bread at 210 degrees. Someone asked if you'll get slides with all the links. Yes, they will be posted as a PDF handout. I'm sure there's several questions here for Sharon, and then we'll move to wrap up. I think we'll only have time for this one question. Sharon, do you consider bread pudding to be similar to custard and pies as far as temperature and testing?
Absolutely. The bread in a bread pudding is already baked, so that would not be the temperature you'd use. You'd use it as a custard setting. So yeah, you want to be sure that that rises to the doneness temperature of custards. And on that chart, we see that at 175.
Okay, great. Thank you. And one other question, I don't want to stump you, but you may know this. Would there be any difference between bleached and unbleached flour as far as the possibility that it's contaminated? Has any study been done on that or research in industry?
It would not impact the presence of pathogens. No, not absolutely not. They would be the same. You would approach them in the same way. They're both raw ingredients. The bleaching process does not do anything regarding microbial.
Okay, great.
Presence. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We're going to move to closing, and we're also going to talk about a little bit of how you can help us wrap things up here. First, I want to thank some of the donors who make possible events like this, who help us to have fightback.org, storyviewdinner.org, safe recipe guide, all these tools and messaging. Thank you, Cargill, FMI Foundation, NSF, the Produce Marketing Association, and Tyson Foods for your support. We have 32 contributing partners in the partnership now. It is a fantastic group of committed companies, associations in food safety. We've got also the considerable input of our government liaisons. FDA is on this webinar. We get support from them in having expert speakers. We're always going to bring you the best experts, top experts out of the agencies on these different commodities, like Dawn did today. Next. Your CEUs, this is your final reminder. We're not able to respond to your emails about CEUs. You will get your CEU certificate either by downloading it right now from the handouts section over here on GoToWebinar. You can see them right there, ANFP, CDR, NEHA. They'll be in the follow-up email, and they'll be on the webinar recordings page in about 24 hours. They'll be listed with the recording of this webinar. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dawn Kautter, Sharon Davis. I'm Shelley Feist. I want to thank Katie Weston, our community engagement manager. Katie is wanting to get to know all of you. Stay tuned in your email for more great events and opportunities for health and food safety educators in the coming year. Naturally, I also want to wish you a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season from the Partnership for Food Safety Education. to all of you. Thank you for your commitment to helping consumers reduce their risk of foodborne illness.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.